Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the economy in China. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that China has been struggling for the past 18 to 24 months, partly as a result of the fact that the property market has collapsed in China. That was providing a huge boost to the economy for the previous 20 years, when property developers were building cities all across China. They literally couldn't build them quick enough. They were selling them off plan to people who were taking on mortgages for properties that hadn't even been built. But unfortunately, all of that came crashing down around 3 years ago, and China has really been struggling to fix its economy since then. And the latest inflation data for November 24 shows that inflation is now down to 0.2%. And as you can see from this chart, it's been falling in every single one of the past 3 months. And over the past 12 months, the highest level that inflation has hit was 0.7% back in February. And that compares to the Bank of China's target inflation rate of 3%. So 0.2% in November is a long way from where China wants it to be. And the reason why the Bank of China wants it to be 3% is that you need an element of growth to be able to pass on cost increases. So businesses in China are paying more for their raw materials and their labour, so their costs are rising. So you need your sales price to also go up to maintain your profit margins. But when you've got 0.2% inflation, you basically can't pass on any of your cost increases. And to highlight that point, this chart shows the movement in producer prices, also referred to as factory gate prices. So basically the price of products when they're leaving Chinese factories. And the scale on the right hand side of this chart shows the percentage movement and starts at 0% at the top and goes down to -3% at the bottom. And what this chart shows is that in every single one of the past 12 months, factory gate prices in China have been falling. And the latest data for November 24 show that year-on-year factory gate prices are down by 2.5%, which means that Chinese businesses are selling their products today for 2.5% lower than they were this time last year. However, their costs have been rising, and so that means that their profit margins have been cut, and it's estimated that more than 40% of businesses in China are now making losses. And if we expand the scale of this chart to show the last 3 years, you can see that producer prices actually moved into negative territory in October 22. So we've seen 26 consecutive months of negative producer prices, which means that companies in China have not increased their prices for more than 2 years, despite the fact that there have been high levels of inflation globally. So that means that raw materials that China have been buying in have been rising in price. And also labour costs have been going up because there's annual wage increases applied in China. And the combination of those factors has wiped out profits for a lot of Chinese businesses. Now, the Chinese authorities are fully aware of this situation, and they know that they need to do something in order to achieve their target GDP growth level of 5% for 2024 and 2025. This chart shows the year-on-year movement in GDP in China, which is measured on a quarterly basis. And what this shows is that in the first quarter of 2024, the annual growth in GDP was 5.3%. So at that point, China was ahead of its 5% target for 2024, and there was a lot of positivity around China actually achieving that figure. However, as you can see in the second quarter of 2024, the year-on-year figure dropped to 4.7%, which meant that China was 0.3% below that 5% target. And the results released for the third quarter of 24 show that the year-on-year movement in GDP is now down to 4.6%. So that means that in order to hit its 5% target for the year end, the final quarter has to produce more than 5% GDP to bring the overall average up. Now, in an effort to try to boost the final quarter's GDP, at the end of September, the Chinese authorities announced that it was going to release a stimulus package, and we saw the Chinese stock market taking off on this news. However, the authorities never really followed through with any specific details, and since that time, we've seen the stock market falling again. However, the Chinese authorities have now announced an official statement saying that they're going to adopt a moderately loose monetary policy, which represents a shift from the previous prudent policy. Now, unfortunately, no definition of what a moderately loose policy is has been provided. However, the markets have bounced back. Everybody is very excited about this moderately loose policy. And there have been calls for the Bank of China to actually reduce interest rates significantly. This chart shows the one-year loan prime rate, which is the benchmark for most corporate and household loans in China over the past 3 years. And what you can see from this chart is that this time last year, the prime loan rate was sitting at 3.45%. And over the past 12 months, there have been 2 reductions in the rate to the current level of 3.1%. So a relatively small movement in terms of interest rates, and commentators are now calling for the Chinese authorities to significantly reduce that prime loan rate, as well as boosting consumer spending in the Chinese economy. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think the data coming out of China is really quite fascinating. When you have inflation falling month on month and getting down to as low as 0.2%, it becomes very difficult, in fact, virtually impossible for the companies in your economy to be able to pass on any cost increases at all. And over the past 2 years, we've seen that producer prices have fallen in every single month. In fact, it's been going on for 26 months. Now, all across the world, there have been high levels of inflation during that period. So that means that the cost of raw materials that China is buying in have gone up over that time. So that means that the profit margins for those companies will have been cut. And in addition to that, there have also been year-on-year pay increases in China. So Chinese businesses have been hit from both sides. Their costs are going up, but their sales prices are going down. So those businesses' profit margins have been squeezed, and many of them are now reporting huge losses. And the longer that goes on, the bigger the question as to whether or not these companies remain viable. Because if you become illiquid, if you run out of cash and you're constantly making losses, then at some point you're going to become bankrupt. Now, obviously, a lot of the banks in China are state-owned, so the Chinese authorities are unlikely to want those banks to force a lot of these companies into bankruptcy, to actually make them illiquid and put them out of business. But what we've got now is a lot of zombie businesses that are existing in China. They are running up bigger and bigger debts because as you make more losses, you basically have to take on more loans to pay for all of your costs. So there's a lot of problems that are building in the Chinese economy. So the Chinese authorities are trying to do something about this. And back in September, they said that they were going to announce a large stimulus package, and the markets got very excited. We saw a 30% increase in the Chinese stock market. However, unfortunately, since then, that hasn't been delivered upon. We haven't seen any major stimulus being fed into the economy. What we have seen is a cut in loan rates. So they've made debt cheaper, and the Chinese authorities have also announced that local governments can borrow more money and they can switch onto special purpose bonds to reduce the cost of their borrowing. But none of that really stimulates the economy. It really just reduces the price of that debt. So it means that you might have a little bit more money to survive upon, but it's not actually increasing your sales if you're a Chinese business. And that's why commentators now are calling for the authorities to do something to stimulate demand. What they need is Chinese consumers to go out and start spending more, actually buying more things to increase retail sales. That means that Chinese businesses would then be able to start increasing their prices, and we would get towards that level of inflation of 3% that's been set by the Chinese central bank. But as it sits at the moment, GDP has been coming down, and the most recent figure of 4.6% for the third quarter of 2024 is short of the 5% target set by the Chinese authorities for the full year of 24. So China needs the final quarter to be a big boost to try to hit that 5% number. What we're seeing from the latest data is that that doesn't look like it's happening. We're not seeing the economy bouncing back. In fact, we're seeing it getting worse. Inflation is still falling and producer prices are still going down. And so there is a major question mark as to whether China is going to hit that 5% target for 24. If you were betting on it right now, you would say it's unlikely that they will do that. If they miss that target, then they may need to reduce their target for 2025 as well, because the momentum is actually moving in the wrong direction at the moment. That is why the Chinese authorities have said that they're changing their monetary policy. They are now adopting a moderately loose policy. Now, as I said earlier, nobody knows what moderately loose means. It seems a bit of a moderately loose title in itself. But we need to see something tangible happening that's going to drive up the economy, that's going to increase spending. So that's why commentators are saying that they want to see interest rates cut and they want to see a big boost given to the whole economy. So it remains to be seen whether or not the authorities will deliver that. If they do, when will it be delivered? It's unlikely to be before the end of December because we're rapidly reaching the end of this year. It's likely, I think, that we will see disappointing figures posted for the final quarter of 2024. And that could potentially cause major problems in China. We could see some of these businesses actually running out of cash. So the banks may have to increase the amount of borrowing that they're giving to all of these different businesses. That's going to put further pressure on the Chinese economy. And I'm currently working on a video looking at the national debt to GDP ratio in China, which is becoming an increasing concern. So watch out for that coming out soon. But the overall summary of today's video is that the latest data that we've seen coming out of China shows us that the Chinese economy is not improving. In fact, it's getting worse. And there is now a major question mark over whether or not China is going to hit its 5% growth target for 2024, and even whether it can achieve that target for 2025. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.